everyone. I'm Ekta and we are Read a Kitab. Welcome to the Read a Kitab podcast. And I have with me today Reenita Malhotra Hora, a wonderful author, podcaster, a screenwriter, and she wears many hats. So, welcome, Reenita. Welcome to the Read a Kitab podcast.
Thank you, Ekta.
Hmm. Hi, Reenita. Congratulations for Ace of Blades.
Thank you. Thank you. It is so exciting. I can't tell you. This book has been in the making for many years. That is the honest truth. So, when Jeco, my publisher, sent me the first copy, I just looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, it's real. It is actually real.
And it looks very beautiful as well because I think more than beauty, it also has a deep sense of belonging.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting because we went back and forth and back and forth over the cover design. I had specific ideas. They, were trying specific things. And it's got a little bit of a noir feel. It looks a little bit like
Yes.
a Hindi movie poster from the 70s. And I love the way it's worked out. I chose a specific image of RK, which was very prevalent at the time, but we haven't seen lately.
Yeah.
In his later years. But somebody said to me, they said, this is a real badass image of him. I was like, okay, that's it. That's it. That's the one we're doing.
Absolutely. And when I saw the cover, I had the same feeling. So, Renita just wanted to talk about and diving straight into Ace of Blades.
Mhm.
I have a few questions that I have, thought to ask you.
Yeah.
And one of them is like that, Ace of Blade kind of turns your family history into, a revolution, Indian history. It also talks about the industrial movement, a large sort of industrial movement that happened. It seems to be a very personal, since it's a memoir, definitely it is very personal, but also I guess with lot of personal stuff there also comes a lot of pain, a lot of wounds, and the book reads like that. So how easier was it to get or dive into it, or what would you want to talk about that?
Oh gosh, loaded question. Or maybe the question's very simple, but I have to think about the answer. Um, Ekta, this book has been in the making for many years, as I said, and had been in my head for more than a decade. Most of RK's life work took place at a time before the age of the internet. I mean, forget about phones and social media, but before the age of the internet. So, up until a few weeks ago, if you'd looked online, you would not really have seen anything about this man or his companies, except for perhaps public records of some lawsuits, family business lawsuits. That happens
Yeah.
with business families. Um, and I knew that for the last 20 or so years and was determined um, not to let it be that way, because to me this was a very important piece of undocumented Indian history, right? And why? Because for 60 of his 84 years of
Yeah.
his life, every Indian man, every man in this country, and frankly outside of India too, in the
Yeah.
Middle East, shaved with his products.
Absolutely.
So I was determined that this story needs to be out there. People have been saying, what a wonderful tribute to your father. And I didn't intend for this to be a tribute to my father. I mean, the fact that it is, brilliant. Absolutely. But to me, it is a coming of age story on three levels. It is a coming of age story of the protagonist, R.K. Malhotra, who, as I always say, hand built India's razor blade industry with his own two hands. And I specifically use the words industry because it went well beyond his product, his business, his specific blades, right? He corralled all the other players into the industry. It is a coming of age story for the consumer products industries in India, and with specific reference to the FMCG sector, and even more specifically for razor blades. And it is a coming of age story for every single Indian man who shaved with his blades, because what do you do when you come of age? You shave.
Fantastic. And I think it has been such a wonderful thing. Plus, it's been a revolution.
Entirely a revolution, because that was the nature of RK's life. Here we are, we look at things, if you're an Indian person,
Mm.
you look at things from a philosophical lens, whether you meant to intentionally or not. It's just our inbuilt DNA, the way we
Yeah.
think, the way our culture is, the way our civilizations have been, over the
Yes.
course of however many thousand years. And to me, if I think about RK and his life work, it was absolutely about revolution.
True.
And I'm glad you chose that word, because revolution as opposed to rebellion,
Yes.
not that this wasn't a rebellious man, he absolutely was. And part of revolution is part of a story of revolution
Hmm.
is also a subset of rebellion. One goes with the other, it has to.
Yes.
But this was a guy who, as you said, revolutionized the entire industry, the way people shaved after independence.
Hmm.
India pretty much had foreign brands, foreign
Yes.
razor blade. There were no Indian brands. There were a few Indian players that had just come into the market before the Malhotras.
Hmm.
Dilip Dhanukar
Hmm.
with Hind Blades. Later on, he developed other brands. So he was actually probably the first Indian player.
Hmm.
Um, but RK was, and the Malhotra family, his family of origin, were the group that really established the word razor blade, or
Hmm.
double edged razor blade, I
Yeah.
should say, and became synonymous with what that meant for the Indian man.
Absolutely fantastic, and also very glorifying in lot of senses. And when I read your last novel, which was The Vermilion Harvest, which is a historical fiction and also set in the foreground of a love story. When I read The Ace of Blades, I was very astounded by the work, by the craft that you bring, because writing, moving on from a piece of fiction to writing a memoir, I think it takes a lot of courage and lot of guts to come and also bring that forth, because you are also defined and constantly shuffling, reworking, recrafting your thoughts, your behaviors, how do you write. So all of that calls for a lot of determination, a lot of thought process that goes into it. So, would you want to also talk about, Renita, your journey from being a lot of fiction that you have written, journey from being a fiction writer to writing something which is absolutely personal?
Absolutely. Um, I always say that fiction is my happy place. You know, it's not that I don't like writing nonfiction. I've written plenty of it, mostly DIY self help, mostly. But fiction sort of takes me into another world where I am happiest in that world where my story exists,
Hmm.
is unfolding, is developing, because it's an exploration for me.
Yeah.
It's like going through a maze. And I absolutely love that. And I promised myself several years ago that I was going to not write any nonfiction and I was just going to focus on my fiction. And honestly, that is what I have been trying to do. Ace of Blades, though, however, is this is a story that I needed to do.
Hmm.
And I knew one thing, that I did not want it to be a boring business biography. Okay, I'm not suggesting that business biographies are boring. Maybe that was badly said. I love them. I love them. But I've worked for Bloomberg, and when you write a Bloomberg business report, it's a very cut and dry
Yeah.
structure that you need to adhere to. And I knew, because I know this man, I know this family, I know, with quite a bit of depth, the sorts of machinations that,
Yes.
have gone on in this household, even if I wasn't always in the room, right? I was always affected. We all were. We all were.
Yes.
Um, I knew it was a very dynamic story with a lot of intrigue, with a lot of conflict,
Hmm.
that I wanted to bring this story to readers to read like fiction. What I mean by that is not making things up,
Yeah.
but what I mean by that is when it comes to things like pacing and structure and storytelling style. Yeah. So I had been very influenced by other nonfiction books that had gone that way. Too Big to Fail by Andrew Ross Sorkin, the Steve Jobs biography, anything that
Yes.
Walter Isaacson, writes, and those were really a frame of reference for me. Now, interestingly enough, I wrote it this way because I had done very deep research, deep interviews. There were conversations which took place over various periods of time. And of course, I wasn't in the room, but I had interviewed those people. I had vetted them. I had validated one word against the other. So I was able to sort of construct those scenes, if you will. And the book went into auction. There were 3 different publishers eventually who wanted to publish it. The one publisher that I thought I wanted to go with said, can you take out those scenes and dialogues and can you just sort of dumb it down into a business report? This is a business story.
Oh.
I know. And I said, you know what? There is no way I'm going to do that because that is what makes this book.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And that is what everybody, the other publishers, everyone loved about it. And they said, but, pardon our reference, but it really feels like a Bollywood story. And I said, this is the story of this man, this household, this family. You ain't seen nothing yet. So that's actually what happened. And to me, even though it is nonfiction and though it is memoir, the way it has been written, the structure, the pacing, the storytelling style reads like fiction. So it's literary nonfiction. And it had to be that way.
And I'm sure such stories are very important in today's times, because there has been a certain rift that that has been existing from forever, and
Yes.
I think it will go on forever between fiction and non-fiction readers. But
Yeah.
I think when a story reads like a story, it becomes very, very closer to the reader itself. So I think I'm looking forward for all the reactions, all the positive reactions that are going to come for Ace of Blades. And with that said, Renita, I also wanted to ask you about writing historical fiction. Vermilion Harvest, the cover is so beautiful. I mean, look at that. So when I started reading the Vermilion Harvest, I had so many questions in my head,
Yeah.
because I was constantly juggling between what's happening in the history, and do I really want to know what's happening deep down on every date chronologically. But no, the book conveys a very large message, with romance as a front, as a front poster to the story, whereas there are many intricate layers that once you start reading the book, you realize as a reader.
Absolutely. So I think the central point of life, for better or for worse, I'm not sure which, is conflict.
Yes.
Conflict exists, it surrounds us, it is us, it defines us, we define it. The question is, what does that mean for me and my life? How do I deal with it? How do I address it? Do I roll right into it? Do I skirt around it? Okay. If I am walking from here to there and it's just one straight path, how do I circumvent the obstacles that are going to show up? Because they are going to show up.
Yeah.
They are going to cause conflict, right?
Yeah.
And when you write fiction, what is the first thing? You're looking for a protagonist, you're looking for an antagonist, you're looking for conflict. What is the conflict? What is it that this protagonist wants to achieve, and what is stopping him or her from getting there? Right? So conflict is central, certainly to any piece of fiction, and certainly to mine, certainly to Vermilion Harvest, where I have an Anglo-Indian school teacher as the protagonist, and that in and of itself, even if we never said anything else, raises so much conflict. Being an Anglo-Indian, half British blood, half Indian blood in colonial Punjab, pre-World War One.
Yes.
Right? Or just post-World War One, I should say, 1919. It was not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing today.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I grew up in a household, talk about Ace of Blades, that sort of family line. was a very direct example of people who had a deep stigma against Anglo Indians.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as a child, I couldn't understand why. Or maybe I didn't question it
Hmm.
enough.
Hmm.
But I did begin to question it later, um, and discovered that, these the horrible words that are used, the half breed people, the mongrel people, I'm
Yeah.
intentionally using these
Yeah.
words. Okay, these are not words that anyone should use, and I'm intentionally using them to show you why they shouldn't be used,
Yes.
right? But people who didn't have a place either in the Indian society or in the British society, who were
Hmm.
given these purgatorial level jobs of a school teacher and post office master and railway worker, because these were considered to be lower level government jobs, but
Hmm.
still too good for Indians. But
Hmm.
lower level government jobs, so the British don't want to deal with them or don't have enough people in the
Yeah.
country to deal with them. So they're given to the half. And it hurt me. I'm a very sensitive person. I believe in the truth, but the truth hurts me. And I know it sounds a little masochistic, but I relish the hurt that it gives me, because it is that hurt which helps me to grow
Hmm.
and my soul to grow. And I was very desperate to understand why, specifically, my father and the people around him and his family had this distaste for these Anglo Indians. And years later, I was working on radio in Hong Kong, and I had to interview an Anglo Indian young man who was a musician. The interview was supposed to be about his music, and it was. But once we finished that, I went like an arrow to his backstory. And I was just obsessed asking him question after question after question. And he just opened up. And it brought me into a world where his entire family never had a place. And it wasn't until they left Calcutta or the environs of Calcutta and moved to a place in England and had settled there for a good 10, 15 years that they finally came into their own and felt that they finally had a place to belong where they weren't questioned by both sides of these two different societies. Now, when we write fiction, frankly, when we write nonfiction as well, we still write from the point of view of the victor. So all of our history books are about those who won the wars,
Hmm.
right? About those who conquered the territories. Usually, women do not have a role, usually, right? Things have
Yes.
begun to change, thank gosh. But the other minorities certainly don't have a role. Anglo Indians, when
Yeah.
have we seen them in our literature? So for me, I was adamant. My protagonist was going to be a woman and she was going to be Anglo Indian.
And I think that's a very deep nerve that you have just touched when you talk about minorities and when you talk about Anglo Indians being a minority. Uh, there has been a certain gaze that the international market has on Indian writers and also the literature that comes out of India.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
how is that kind of shaping up? Or I think why I ask this question is because you have been writing some fantastic stories, like the Vermilion Harvest. Now we have Ace of Blades. We also had other stories like Operation Mom,
Mhm.
which is a young adult genre. And I think when we look at stories which are our own, which we belong to, or which they belong to us in a certain sense, you know what I mean. So when they are looked from an international gaze, why is it that South Asian stories deserve a very, very important space in the entire nation, in the international markets?
Well, for so many reasons, and that's such a great question. I mean, when you look at historical fiction and history, and you look at sort of the history of the world, South Asia is right there. Perhaps, I'll sound biased, and I am because I'm from here, you know. Uh, but we play a very, very important part in the history of the planet,
Absolutely.
in the history of mankind, and in the present. I mean, if you just look at the sheer numbers,
Hmm.
where are your largest populations in the world, right?
Yes.
So, if that is true, which it is, why are our stories not out there? Now, you could argue that, well, our stories are out there, But I grew up in an India where outside of India, the glorified notion of India or South Asia was this land of the snake charmers and the elephants, right? And that was a pet peeve with all of us, every single
Yes.
person in my generation. Not that we have anything against elephants, we love them, please. You know, um, but there was so much more to explain, communicate, bring to the world about what, life in India is like,
Hmm.
life in the Indo subcontinent, what it has to offer, right? And then today, even in today, I live in California,
Hmm.
and the it thing is the Indian wedding, which has become. I love weddings. I had one, kind of a crazy story, but I'll get into that another time. But to be at this Indian wedding with the outfit changes and the barat and the Bollywood songs and the Punjabi sangeet, fantastic. But that's not the only story we have. That's not the only comedy we have. That's not the only thing that lends itself to the creation of music and lyrics. You
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
and for me, it is quintessential to convey the truth about the Indian experience and the South Asian experience to those outside of our culture and, frankly, within our culture. Because within our culture, to say that here I am, I'm a Punjabi person, I don't know perhaps the first thing about the other subcultures, right? So here's my opportunity to explore those, right? The meaning, we use the words India and Indian and South Asian, but what do they actually mean? There
Hmm.
is so much that is encompassed in these words. There is so much to explore, to uncover, to reveal, to unlayer, that it's going to take a lifetime or several lifetimes of several storytellers to even begin to scratch the surface about, in terms of how to get there.
I absolutely agree to what you're saying because it also makes a lot of sense when it comes from authors and art makers who also kind of who also want to bring it to a pedestal, because I think it is now extremely important, and we see a lot of literature coming from the South
Yeah,
Asian community. There's a lot of festivals that are happening for the South Asian writers,
right.
and that is clearly a mark that um, it's time that there has been voices but they've not been heard. So
Correct.
and very different kind of literature, so I think that is also very important, very different narratives, very different voices. My thought when you were talking about all of this was that you being living outside India for quite some time, and you are Indian, so like there is an Indian person inside you and there is an Indian American inside you. So all these stories that come from you, they also kind of feel like, do you have this feeling that all those stories that come from you have a hyphenated existence?
I would say not all of the stories, but depending upon the story that I'm working on right now, I will choose, am I wearing my hat of the Desi from Mumbai, because that's how I identify first, actually Bombayite rather than Mumbaikar. you know, um, I identify as a Bombayite first more than as a Punjabi person. So I go, my identity, if I were to actually say, is Bombay first, India next, Punjabi third, and California fourth.
Wow, you have it all sorted.
Well, I have at least the rest of this lifetime to try, and then we'll go into the next. But, you know, you're absolutely right. I do have one foot in India and one foot outside. And, you know, my perspective might not change, but my method of addressing
Hmm.
those different worlds does. And from that comes humor, from that comes lived experience, from that comes learning. And why not explore this? I'll give you the example of Operation Mom,
Hmm.
which is a YA contemporary rom com that I wrote. It's very much a contemporary Mumbai story. It's about a 17-year-old girl who is annoyed with her single mother, and girls at 17 are usually annoyed with their mother, and perhaps beyond 17 too. So but she's annoyed with her single mother and wants to get her off her back, so she decides to set her up through the dating apps, and that's her method, Mom needs a focus in life who's not me, so let me get her a boyfriend. Now, it's a little outlandish. At the time I wrote it, they were like, this is not what we do in India. Usually it's the mother sending up the daughter and wo bhi shadi ke liye. And I was like, forget all that. Forget all that. I don't want the word shadi. It just doesn't figure here. There's plenty of other spaces for that. So I sort of went nuts with it. A lot of it comes from my own experience. There were characters from my life and my childhood and my adulthood that have featured in some way, shape, or form, or aspects of them in my characters. And I had a blast. I sort of locked myself into a hole over 6 weeks and just got this done. I had literally threw my nuclear family out of the country at that point because I wanted to focus on this. Um, when it came time to think about how this might translate from book to screen, I had a couple of offers, in Mumbai for the book. This was right in the early days of COVID. We went into lockdown and, things changed. Later on, a friend of mine in California actually said to me, she said, Renita, what you have is a Cinderella template. And I said, Julie, what is that? What do you mean? And she said, this is a story about mothers and daughters that anyone anywhere can relate to, because everybody has angst with their mother. Everybody's mother drives them nuts. For every mother, their daughter drives them nuts. I mean, this is universal. But your specificity is the view of the Punjabi Mumbaikar in Mumbai right now and how they're dealing with it. And that is brilliant. But you could take that, you could put it in South America, you could put it in North America, you could put it in China. You're still going to have this mother daughter angst. And that sort of got me thinking, one thing led to another. And the screenplay version that I then later developed was not set in Mumbai, but it was set in New Jersey. New Jersey was specific because visually it's very appealing, but also there's a very strong Indian community.
Yes.
And but the jokes had to change, the humor had to change. The story was the same and the basic underlying humor, okay. But now you've got this immigrant mother who's been, let's say in the US in this case, about 30 years. And she thinks she's very progressive, she knows everything. She's now no longer Indian, she's American. And she's got this first generation daughter who's Indian American, who is more American than the Indian. I mean, there's way more in common with her than her American peer than anybody in India her age, right? And already you've got this disconnect.
Yes.
And then you've got the neurotic dad who's fighting for airspace to get in a word edgewise amongst all of these crazy, feisty women. And he is living in the 1970s and he's saying to his wife, why are you not obsessive enough? And she's like, no, I'm progressive. I'm not obsessive. What do you mean? You're a desi mother. You can't be this way. And she's like, oh, he's right. I've got to be more obsessive. So even though she's this immigrant and she thinks, I'm with the contemporary crew, when it comes to the ex telling her, you better get on it and figure out what your daughter's up to, she's like, yeah. And the Americans can't understand that. They're like, why would you listen to him when he's your ex-husband? But that is the whole double standard that we live by. And there is so much comedy in that. So I said, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to dig in because, this is something that every immigrant community in America can resonate with. They don't have to come from India. But they're getting the view of the Indian family in the Indian American context in that case.
And how stories change, even though the lineage, the DNA remains the same, but as they travel across borders, as they travel across geographies, the stories change in some or the other way. So, Renita, and the way you were talking and you were so excited about your story, I was also thinking, it was going on in my mind that why shouldn't I not ask you about your podcast, True Fiction?
What would you like to ask?
So I think I wanted to ask you that how did True Fiction happen, and what is it that goes behind in the making of True Fiction? Also, there's another podcast which talks about supernatural elements. There is so much more fun, is what I see happening there in the name of Shadow Realm. So, would you also want to talk about both of those?
Absolutely. So I come from a radio background. I have worked on radio as a host and a producer for many, many years. In fact, I've done more audio and radio journalism, perhaps even than print. Is that true? I'm not sure. Let me think about that. But audio and radio, my radio days were just my happiest days. And perhaps because when I was working on radio, it sort of reminded me of being a child in the kitchen in the mornings. We lived for a short spell of our lives in the UK, and my mother, while she was making breakfast and getting us ready for school, would switch on the radio. So it was that mental thing, and therefore my comfort place. And I felt much happier as a radio journalist than even exploring, video or TV or anything like that. So I have a radio background, and because of that, over time, I became very critical of the way, and particular, perhaps would be a better way to say it than critical, of the way stories are related in sound. Okay?
Yes.
So for me, music, sound effect, soundscape is of utmost importance. And I'll talk about Shadow Realm first because that actually is a narrative fiction podcast that is based on an unpublished manuscript that I have.
Very interesting.
Yes, it's very much a Percy Jackson meets Vedic mythology. When I say that, it is not by any stretch of the imagination any kind of mythological retelling at all, right? But very boy action adventure fantasy, right? So the book hasn't been published yet, but the podcast was out actually a couple of years ago and was neck to neck with Disney's Frozen. And I was very, very obsessive about, the soundscape and the fact that if you close your eyes and listen to this, you must immediately be immersed in a world that you want to stay in forever. And I was lucky enough to find an Indian musician, Kanekeshwaran. He is based in Chicago. He is a Hindustani classical musician, but he knows sound and music and musicology like nobody, So the soundtrack he put together for this podcast was just something incredible with things like the Vanar March and Hanuman's theme and Arya's mother's theme, and it's because the story, even though some say it's middle grade, some say it's young adult, some say it's crossover, so when you talk about genre, I mean, just let me know once you do. It appeals to many different people on many levels, and again, because this is an Indian story, it's philosophical. It can't help but be that way. And it leads you to think and wonder and question things in a way that you haven't before. And that's intentional, perhaps. So I was very keen on the fact that the audio rendition of that sort of reflect all of that and get you going and get you thinking. This, so it's particular about the storytelling style. With the True Fiction project, that is a whole lot different. Firstly, true fiction, what is that? That's an oxymoron.
Yes.
Right? But that is intentional.
Yeah.
Because I had this life at that point, where I had come out of radio. I had started the very first podcasts for Bloomberg, my team and I. We were training the other members of the Bloomberg team on taking their audio content, putting it into the podcast medium, etc. And then I left to work for an audio tech company, and podcasting, podcast consulting, etc. was very much what I was doing. Except I didn't have my own podcast, and the idea always got stepchild treatment. So there came a time when I said, okay, now I'm doing it, but what do I do? I've written all these nonfiction books, I've written these fiction books, I'm confused. What do I focus on? Do I do a podcast on Ayurveda? I'm already stereotyped there. And it was my producer, Tracy, who takes full credit for this. She said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to marry your nonfiction background with your fiction background. You are going to do a Q&A style podcast where you explore the journey of a story from its nonfiction roots to its fictional outcome. And out of that conversation that you have with your guest, you are going to create an audio fiction piece. Or if they're already a fiction writer, in some way, shape, or form, you're going to go and ask them about their backstory and what led to that. So that really is the marriage of the nonfiction and the fiction, my two different hats, the True Fiction project.
Wow. And I think that also somehow now I can relate, how the books are coming out, how things are shaping up. So I think I can go on and on with you, Renita. And so I want to ask you, Renita, what's coming up next, and also if you have an advice or maybe nuggets of wisdom that you would want to pass on to the viewers watching this podcast.
So, what's coming up next is interesting. I've been in Mumbai for the last couple of months, been having a lot of different meetings with publishers and, pitching some book to film projects as well. So, I'm also waiting to see in what order exactly which ones of those are coming up next first. Next first, right? Or first next. I will say that the Arka Chronicles, which is the Percy Jackson meets Vedic mythology story series that I had mentioned, I am shopping for a publisher for that, and that is definitely a goal for this year. 2026 is to find that right publisher, author, marriage. It's a marriage that I'm constantly looking to find a happy place for. Um, but also, I went down the rabbit hole um, searching for, researching, looking for the truth or the truths, perhaps, about the stories of the Gadarites in San Francisco. Yeah, the members of the Gadar party who were planning a revolution from San Francisco, where I live, right, to overthrow the British Empire in the years 1914, 15, 16, 17, those years. There's a reference to the Gadar movement in Vermilion Harvest. It's a similar time period.
Yes.
And that's what actually got me interested in this idea because I began to uncover all of the goings on in those years in San Francisco and the fact that I lived there. Obviously, I knew these streets, I knew what they were referring to, and I was fascinated. And that is a story that has already taken shape into a short film.
Wow.
We are shooting a short film in a few weeks, in a couple of months from now. Very heavily in the pre production phase. As we speak, I've been working on it day and night and working on a feature screenplay because the idea is that the short film will be a proof of concept. And then, as I mentioned, I've been having publisher meetings here. There is suddenly a whole slew of interest in this story in book form as well.
Wow.
So I'm going to just stop at that because I don't want to be unfocused and all over the place. I think, with these two projects, that's plenty.
And I think so much is happening and so much interesting is happening. So we are really looking forward to seeing your new things coming up, new projects coming up, new books coming up, and also definitely the book turning up into a screen project. I think with that said, Renita, thank you so much for being our guest today. And it was absolutely a pleasure speaking to you. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And I wish you all the very best for Ace of Blades.
Thank you so much, Ekta. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And I will say, please do encourage viewers and readers to read the books, to get in touch with me. I am very sort of active on Instagram and everything else. Not everything else, but the other things. Some of the other things. If you go to my website, reenita.com, that will sort of lead you to my Instagram, my Substack, my LinkedIn, etc. And I like to engage with my audiences a lot because a lot of what I will write about in the future, whether it's a screenplay, whether it's a book, whether it's an article, comes from what you want and what you're telling me and what you are inspiring me to write. So please do get in touch. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Renita. Thank you, everyone, those who have been watching us. And I was in conversation with Reenita Malhotra Hora, the author of her new book, Ace of Blades. So, like, share, and subscribe the channel. All the details about the books we were speaking and about the author, her journey, everything, all the details and the links are in bio. Go check them out and do give us a tap and do get in touch. Have a great, great day ahead.